Sometimes I catch myself moving through the day as if I'm on autopilot. Wake, work, eat, scroll, sleep, repeat. Nothing feels out of the ordinary. It's the kind of rhythm most people would nod at and call normal. In fact, on the surface, it's what I always believed normal looked like. I work hard, I keep busy, and I manage the basics of life. But beneath that surface, something started whispering. A quiet unease that wouldn't settle no matter how much I pushed forward. Energy that once felt natural began to fade. Focus slipped away like sand through my fingers, and some days, even simple tasks felt heavy, like swimming against a current I couldn't see. I remember sitting on the couch one evening after a long day. The lights were dimmed. My phone buzzed with notifications I barely glanced at, and yet my mind refused to shut down. I caught myself thinking, why do I feel so drained? So flat? It wasn't from one night of poor sleep or a stressful meeting. It was this slow, creeping depletion, a feeling at odds with what I thought I was doing right. I wasn't reckless or neglectful, not by any obvious measure. I was just living my normal life. But inside, I sensed the subtle ways this normalcy was chipping away at me, like tiny cracks forming in what I thought was solid ground. What struck me most was the disconnect between how I felt and what I believed my routine represented. I was doing all the right things. A job that paid the bills, meals that filled the stomach, some exercise here and there, moments pretending to rest. But the truth was, my body was telling a different story. Not with loud alarms, but through little signs I often ignored. Stubborn fatigue, a restless mind that refused to focus, irritability that flared without warning, and a quiet sense that something important was slipping away. It didn't feel like a crisis, so I didn't treat it like one. But deep down, I knew this wasn't how I wanted to exist. I started paying more attention to those small undercurrents, those invisible forces nudging me off balance. It wasn't a single bad habit or moment of weakness. It was the accumulation of subtle choices. Stay up scrolling through endless feeds, grab whatever food was fastest and easiest, push through exhaustion because rest felt like falling behind. These weren't catastrophic mistakes. They were normal behaviors that had quietly become the background noise of my life. And somewhere in the midst of it all, my body's natural rhythms, the ones I took for granted, were being ignored and worn down. This realization felt strange at first, almost like waking from a fog. I hadn't recognized until then how deeply ingrained these patterns had become, or how much they shaped my internal environment. It was as if I'd been walking through a familiar room but overlooked the way the air had grown heavy, the light dim, the energy stagnant. I felt an urge to uncover what was really going on beneath the surface, to peel back the layers and understand the silent signals my body kept sending but I had stopped hearing. Why was it that despite all my doing, something essential was slipping away, something vital to my strength, presence, and vitality? What made this harder was that all the evidence pointed to something confusing. I wasn't failing because I was reckless or irresponsible, but because what I considered normal had warped into a form of quiet self-sabotage. Every day, subtle habits sent messages of threat and scarcity to my nervous system, like an internal alarm system buzzing non-stop. Yet, like so many habits, they felt invisible, even harmless, when in reality they were reshaping my body's landscape. Somewhere within me, the foundation that allowed me to feel energized, confident, and alive was being eroded. The challenge was to recognize it, and to start moving differently with intention. It wasn't about guilt or blame. It wasn't about wholesale life changes or impossible ideals. It was about realizing that real transformation begins when we become aware of what's hidden in plain sight. That discomfort I'd been feeling wasn't a wall to hit, but a signal to listen more closely. My body wasn't just reacting to what I was doing outwardly. It was responding to the repeated whispers of habit, to the atmosphere I created inside my own system. And if I wanted to reclaim my vitality, not just as a distant goal but as an everyday reality, I needed to face those subtle patterns honestly. I know this might resonate with you because it's not just my story. Many of us live within routines that look good from the outside, yet leave us feeling disconnected from our own strength inside. We believe we're managing just fine, yet there's an invisible strain holding us back from full presence and power. Maybe you felt tired even when resting enough, unfocused when your mind should be sharp, or stuck in moods that don't match what you want for yourself. This quiet struggle is more common than we acknowledge, but it rarely gets the attention it deserves. So here we are, on the edge of uncovering what lies beneath that surface. I'm inviting you to join me on a journey to reveal those hidden influences, because once they're visible, they can be changed. It's not about perfection but about realigning with what feels true and alive deep within us. And as we move forward, I want you to keep something close. These habits don't define your worth or potential. They are merely signals, asking for a new way to be heard and transformed. Before we go any further, take a moment and consider this. What little habit or unnoticed pattern might be quietly draining your energy right now? What invisible thread pulls you away from the vitality you deserve? Bring that question to the front of your mind. Recognition is the first step toward healing, and as we move ahead, that awareness will be your compass. Together, we'll explore not just what's holding us back, but how to gently and powerfully step toward a renewed sense of strength and balance. This is just the beginning. There was a moment I'll never forget. Sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment after a long day that seemed to blend into the endless routine. I stared at the reflection in the window, not the worn-out world outside, but the tired eyes staring back. It wasn't exhaustion from physical exertion. It was something deeper, an internal drain that I couldn't quite articulate. It hit me suddenly, like a chill creeping along the spine. How steady exposure to subtle stressors had become the norm for me, an invisible weight pressing against the marrow of my being. I realized this wasn't simply about how I spent my hours. It was about how my body perceived those hours as a sequence of persistent warnings rather than moments of safety or restoration. Life had transformed into a landscape peppered with unrelenting low-grade alerts. Picture a forest where small fires flicker across the ground constantly. The trees don't burn down overnight, but day by day, the soil changes, the undergrowth becomes brittle, the ecosystem shifts. My body's signals worked the same way. The tiny stressors, unnoticed on their own, compounded into a landscape where survival instincts kicked into overdrive, quietly hijacking my very biology. One day, I caught myself reflexively reaching for my phone the moment I sat down, desperate for distraction or quick dopamine hits. At first, I told myself it was a harmless habit, a way to recharge. Yet, as I scrolled through endless streams of news, messages, and notifications, a strange paradox emerged. I felt more drained, more fragmented. It was like eating junk food for my brain, consuming bits of information that never truly nourished but kept me craving for more. Within that cycle, a profound feeling took root. My nervous system was overworked, scrambling to process constant bursts of stimulus without the chance to rest, adapt, or recalibrate. What made this experience clearer was when I looked back at moments of genuine calm and vitality. Early mornings spent unplugged, long walks far from screens, the quiet spaces when my breath slowed and my mind settled. Those moments felt like rare oases of safety where my body sensed permission to restore and flourish. Contrast that with the barrage of digital disruptions and fragmented attention, which likened to being stuck in a room where the alarms never stop ringing, even when no real threat exists. Over time, my body ceased to prioritize growth or strength. Instead, it geared everything toward survival mode, sacrificing hormonal balance for the sake of constant vigilance. I recount this because our internal environment is not a passive backdrop. It actively responds to every stimulus, every habit, whether we recognize it or not. So I began treating these habitual stress signals as invitations for deeper investigation rather than trivial nuisances to ignore. There was an old friend in my story named Sam, whose daily treadmill was more literal. A man who literally ran miles every day, yet complained endlessly about being fatigued, irritable, and feeling off. One evening, we talked about his relentless overcommitment and rarely resting. Sam confessed that he pushed himself so hard to keep up with expectations that his body turned those pressures into chronic stress, suppressing his natural drive and vitality. Through his story, I saw the complex dance between effort and overexertion, between striving and stressing. The body doesn't distinguish where strain comes from, it only knows the language of threat and demand. Sam's relentless pace meant his system stayed on, leaving little room for hormonal balance or true recovery. Our conversation stirred something in me. The notion that intricate habits, even those masquerading as discipline or productivity, can quietly dismantle our inner equilibrium. As days unfolded, I began tuning in more to physical cues, watching how my body tensed before sleep, how my appetite fluctuated unpredictably, how irritability sparked over small triggers. I confronted the reality that these responses were my body's way of crying out for a reset. The tricky part was learning to distinguish between mental resistance to slowing down and the genuine need my system had for strategic pauses and nourishment. It was like planting seeds in barren soil. Without nurturing the ground beneath me, nothing new could sprout. At one point, I experimented with scheduling intentional breaks during my day, short intervals away from screens, moments of mindful breathing, subtle shifts in my eating habits toward more anti-inflammatory choices. I noticed a transformation. These small acts reframed the narrative my body was holding on to. They whispered, "You're safe. You can rebuild." Slowly, the chronic hum of alertness gave way, and layers of unexplained fatigue peeled off like old paint. Each mindful choice felt like a stitch mending the frayed fabric of my inner balance. Now, imagine applying this kind of awareness when your own days erupt with demands, emails piling up, distractions pulling you every which way, obligations blurring lines between activity and rest. What if, rather than surrendering to the storm, you recognize these moments as subtle messages from your body? Messages demanding not drastic overhauls, but deliberate attention, strategic acts of reconnection to your own internal rhythms. That shift, as I discovered, marks the turning point from mere survival to authentic vitality. This inner landscape, though often invisible, shapes everything we project outward. The rhythms we honor, no matter how small or routine, sculpt the chemistry within, influencing profound elements like hormonal harmony, mood stability, and energy availability. The challenge lies in seeing these rhythms as sacred dialogue between body and mind, rather than background noise to be drowned out. Recognizing this network of responses restored a sense of agency in me, a realization that healing begins with honoring the subtle language of my body's needs. In embracing this perspective, I invite you to explore the unnoticed choreography of your daily decisions. What habitual sparks are lighting up your nervous system in ways that pull energy downward rather than build it up? And more importantly, what simple, intentional pauses can you create to transform those sparks into steady fires of strength? The journey isn't about eliminating life's demands, but about weaving balance between stimulation and rest. A balance where your system can sense safety again and give rise to your natural force. One afternoon, a friend named Marcus invited me to join him for a weekend retreat in the woods, a place far removed from the chaos of city life. At first, I hesitated. The demands of work and the constant pull of screens made me think I couldn't afford the time. Yet something inside me nudged toward the unknown, a whisper suggesting that stepping away might reveal things I hadn't yet recognized about myself. So I went. As we hiked through towering pines and listened to the subtle rustle of leaves overhead, I noticed how my mind, usually tethered to endless to-do lists, began to unspool. Each breath felt more expansive, and with every step, a subtle transformation unfolded. It was as if my whole body started recalibrating to a natural tempo. Slow, rhythmic, unhurried. I hadn't realized how disconnected I'd become from this basic rhythm. The digital screens, late-night work sessions, and quick fixes had accumulated so thoroughly that the contrast was almost shocking. Here, immersed in quiet, patterns unraveled that I didn't even know were woven into my days. Marcus, ever observant, shared something that struck a chord. Think of your body like your phone's battery. If you keep running apps in the background without closing them, it drains faster and works slower. We don't realize how many small, constant apps, thoughts, distractions, habits, are running under the surface, tugging at our energy. That metaphor lodged itself in my mind. It made me question what invisible functions I was running because I believed they were harmless or even necessary. That retreat sparked a new frame for me, understanding my body not only as a physical machine but as a complex network reacting to an intricate weave of subtle choices. Tailoring my daily existence simply by becoming more intentional about these invisible background apps led to a cascade of effects. I started experimenting with micro moments of disconnection during the day, like stepping outside for fresh air or closing my eyes and tuning into silence for just 2 minutes. These small interventions cultivated an unexpected sense of expansion and steadiness. One night back in the city, after a long meeting, I decided to test this awareness in a more concrete way. Instead of diving into my phone or rushing to catch up on emails, I sat quietly in my dimly lit room and took notice of how my body responded. I observed the tension in my shoulders, the shallow rhythm of my breath, and the restlessness in my thoughts. Rather than immediately attempting to force change, I simply acknowledged each sensation like a cautious visitor in unfamiliar territory. That presence itself began to melt layers of built-up resistance. This practice showed me that healing begins with receptivity. When I stopped battling and started listening, subtle expressions of discomfort transformed from enemies into messengers. For example, one afternoon, while wrapping up a project, I felt a sharp impulse to check an app that promised instant distraction. Instead of reflexively obeying, I asked myself, what am I really seeking in this moment? It revealed a craving for mental clarity and calm, experiences I hadn't allowed myself fully in weeks. Making that distinction led me to take a deep breath, close my eyes for a moment, and hold space for stillness. To my surprise, this choice replenished my focus far more effectively than any digital distraction. This new approach wasn't about eliminating all stress or stimulation. Far from it. It was about learning to calibrate the balance so that I could engage fully without surrendering my core energy reserves. Observing how different habits either fed or drained me was like switching from autopilot into a heightened state of awareness. I began framing my days around the question, which moments am I unconsciously investing my power into, and how might I redirect some of that love inward? Through this lens, daily routines took on a new light. For instance, evening meals became not just nourishment for my body, but a ritual of honoring digestion and rest. I eliminated distractions during dinner, focusing instead on the flavors, textures, and rhythm of chewing. These acts, seemingly small, sparked a profound respect for my body's needs and signals, a sharp contrast to earlier nights spent shoveling food mindlessly in front of a screen. One morning, after weeks of integrating these shifts, I ran into a colleague who remarked, "You look different, more grounded, like you're really present." That observation was a powerful confirmation. It wasn't external accomplishments or busy schedules that transformed me. It was reclaiming the subtle territories where energy is created and preserved, often overlooked in the rush of everyday life. This journey taught me that our energy reserves are intricately tied to how we honor pauses and transitions. Not every break requires grand gestures. Sometimes, it's the breath held between words and conversation, the seconds before we respond to irritation, or the quiet moment when we close a laptop and let ourselves simply be. Cultivating these micro-rituals rewrote my relationship with rest and exertion. They ceased to be opposites and instead danced together. Now, consider how this applies when you face repeated stressors or heavy demands. What small, intentional shift can interrupt the cycle? A moment to ground yourself, a pause to savor something real and nourishing, a refusal to let distraction dictate your attention. Recognizing these openings can become your anchor, a way back to your strength and clarity even amidst chaos. Ultimately, learning to steward my energy differently reframed my entire approach to life's pressures. It wasn't about adding more to my plate, but refining what I carry, choosing what deserves my lifeblood and what can be released. This nuanced transformation taught me the art of weaving presence and quiet power into the fabric of everyday existence. One evening, after an especially long stretch of work that blurred into personal time, I found myself pacing the quiet hallway of my apartment, unable to settle. The usual tricks, scrolling through my phone or trying to binge-watch something, felt hollow. I realized I was craving something deeper, an anchor I hadn't yet named. That's when a vivid memory came rushing back, from a camping trip years before. Under a telescope-speckled sky, far from artificial light and incessant noise, I felt a unique kind of stillness settle into my bones. It wasn't boredom or emptiness. It was a cleansing silence, a breathing space that had nothing to prove and no deadlines to chase. In that moment, I understood that what I truly needed was to reclaim a form of internal quiet so rare in my everyday life. Walking into my kitchen, I decided to brew a simple cup of chamomile tea, the steam rising softly into the dim light. As I waited, the act of slowing down, just slightly, began to untangle the tight coil of tension within me. This small ritual became a gateway to recognizing how frequently I denied myself such undemanding pauses. Those breaks, gentle moments of disengagement, were vital signposts beckoning toward equilibrium, a chance to reset complex hormonal rhythms that had been thrown off course by perpetual alertness. It struck me how, for so long, I mistook busyness for progress, ignoring the rich undercurrents of restoration quietly whispering for attention beneath the clamor. That night, I lay awake reflecting on this discovery, aware of a persistent low hum of internal friction that I'd coexisted with but never understood fully. I recalled my brother Jason telling me about his struggle with burnout after years of grinding in a high-pressure job. He described how his mind raced at night, his appetite vanished, and his impulses scattered like leaves in a storm. "I felt like a machine running on empty oil," he once said. Hearing his words reframed my own experience. It wasn't merely fatigue. It was an energetic imbalance caused by prolonged neglect of subtle cues from our bodies. Cues that signal when foundations begin to crumble before visible cracks emerge. In Jason's case, his hormonal systems eventually fell out of sync, reflecting the unsustainable demands he silently bore. Inspired by his struggle, I began documenting my days with a newfound intentionality. I noted the moments when I felt most at peace and when tension flared unexpectedly. What emerged was a pattern. Activities that fostered a sense of accomplishment but ignored emotional or physical replenishment contributed to a slow siphoning of energy. In contrast, rituals that engaged my senses, like feeling the rough bark of a tree during a brief walk or the subtle aroma of freshly brewed coffee, offered healing pulses of connection, reminding me that my body thrives on more than productivity alone. I realized that reclaiming these sensory experiences was crucial to rewiring deep-seated patterns that suppressed hormonal balance. This journey wasn't linear. Some days I relapsed into frenetic pacing or the false promise of multitasking. Yet with each setback, I grew more curious about the emotional currents beneath my restlessness. One afternoon, after snapping at a close friend over a minor misunderstanding, I sat alone and asked myself what truly triggered that swelling irritability. I unearthed an accumulation of small, unacknowledged pressures, from skipped meals to screen time extending late into the night, that had quietly eroded my emotional resilience. Recognizing these triggers wasn't about self-judgment. It was about cultivating kindness toward myself while dismantling the walls built from neglect. To translate awareness into action, I experimented with a practice I now call conscious reentry. After periods of intense mental activity, instead of charging ahead to the next task, I paused to engage with my immediate environment, feeling the ground beneath my feet, listening to ambient sounds, or tracing the veins of leaves on a plant I kept by my window. Those brief moments anchored me back into my physical reality, creating gentle ripples of recalibration within. Over weeks, I noticed that these interludes, though small, significantly reduced my scattered feelings and fostered steadiness that spilled over into my work, relationships, and moods. One afternoon, during a crowded subway commute, the rush of bodies and noise usually sparked anxiety within me. Yet I drew upon this new tool, closing my eyes just briefly, feeling the sway of the train and the rhythm of my breath. The chaos around transformed from overwhelming to tolerable. My energy stabilized, and I realized that developing internal footholds like this was essential for navigating modern life's relentless pace. This method became a portable sanctuary, reminding me that strength isn't magnets to external conditions, but how firmly I could root myself despite them. Through these shifts, I began reshaping my relationship with discomfort, learning that restlessness wasn't the enemy to banish but a compass directing attention to neglected needs. The emotional language of my body evolved from cryptic warnings to clear invitations for care and recalibration. That awareness deepened my commitment to nurturing harmony among the countless factors influencing my hormonal health. Sleep quality, nutritional balance, environmental cues, and mental pacing. Instead of reacting in fragmented bursts, I allowed myself to build resilience by weaving these elements into a cohesive, life-sustaining rhythm. Now, imagine bringing this framework into your life. Think about the moments when accumulated tensions bubble up, perhaps after a hectic meeting, during strained conversations, or in the quiet hours before sleep. What if, in those instances, you welcomed the discomfort as a guide rather than a foe? What if you responded with small, intentional acts that soothe and center, creating a personal refuge even amidst relentless demands? That is the doorway where quiet transformation begins, an invitation to rewrite your inner narrative and reclaim the vitality that has patiently awaited your recognition. Reflecting on this journey so far, I find myself standing at a crossroads where the intangible threads of my experience entwine into a tapestry both fragile and resilient. It is as if I have been navigating a dense forest, each step revealing new textures in the terrain beneath my feet, sometimes soft moss cushioning my path, at other times sharp stones forcing a careful gait. This landscape is neither purely welcoming nor entirely hostile. It exists in a delicate equilibrium shaped by countless unseen forces working quietly beneath my awareness. As I pause here, I realize that my perception has shifted, not because I uncovered a singular answer, but because I began to inhabit the space between questions with greater attentiveness and an openness to discovery. The rhythms coursing through my body and mind no longer feel disconnected from one another. I sense a convergence where something once fragmented now pulses with a coordinated vitality. It reminds me of the way rivers merge, their individual currents blending and folding into a broader flow that neither erases their uniqueness nor diminishes their strength. Within me, this confluence evokes both a release and an invitation to participate consciously in the ongoing dialogue between what I can control and what I must learn to welcome as part of my unfolding story. I recall a moment during this process when a sudden storm caught me unprepared while hiking alone. The sky darkened with surprising speed, and the familiar paths became obscured beneath sheets of rain. I sought shelter beneath the sheltering grasp of a large oak, its wide branches drumming relentlessly with droplets. Initially, panic grasped my chest. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts like the swirling mist around me. Yet, as I settled into the shelter, I began to notice the storm's rhythm not as an interruption but as an essential part of the forest's life cycle. That fierce energy outside compelled a stillness within I had long neglected to nurture. Through the thunder and torrents, I discovered a strange kind of calm woven into embracing unpredictability. This encounter mirrors the unfolding realization that the patterns shaping my internal world are not fixed barriers but currents to navigate. They demand both respect and reconciliation. The forces that once seemed like relentless pressures or quiet betrayals now appear as signals, messengers urging a recalibration of priorities and a recalibration of presence. What emerges is an awareness that true momentum arises not from frenzied resistance but through intentional alignment with the deeper pulses that sustain and regenerate. In the evenings that followed, as I sat by a window watching shadows lengthen and the light soften, I became increasingly attuned to how subtle shifts ripple through my being over time. The layered interplay of sensory impressions, emotional echoes, and physical sensations coalesced into a rich inner landscape where movement and stillness coexist in intricate harmony. It occurs to me that this is less about chasing elusive balance and more about cultivating a dynamic responsiveness, learning to lean into tension when necessary and gather strength through surrender at other times. We often carry invisible burdens woven from the fabric of everyday choices, each decision a brushstroke on the canvas of our vitality. I have come to understand that these strokes can accumulate into images both vivid and shadowed, shaped not just by isolated moments but by the cadence of repetition and attention. Our bodies, with their remarkable sensitivity, absorb these nuances constantly, translating them into a language of sensation and instinct that often whispers beneath the noise of thought and distraction. This subtle dialogue between internal experience and outward action challenges me to refine my awareness continually. It is akin to tuning a delicate instrument, where recalibration requires patience and nuanced listening rather than forceful adjustments. Over time, I discerned patterns in my impulses and reactions, markers pointing toward the emergence of authentic vitality, waiting patiently to be reclaimed. Through mindful engagement with these markers, I began to sense the contours of a pathway not dictated by external expectations, but shaped from an authentic synthesis of inner truth and outer expression. I remember speaking with a mentor during this time, who likened this process to tending a garden that had been neglected, where the soil holds both the remnants of wear and the rich possibility of new growth. She said, "You don't clear the land in a single sweep. Instead, you nurture it gently, one seedling at a time, trusting the rhythm of seasons." Her words anchored me in a deeper patience and compassion, shifting my focus from frantic repair towards steady cultivation. Now, standing on the brink of what lies ahead, I feel a convergence of insights weaving through my awareness like currents beneath the ocean's surface. Unseen but powerful, shaping the journey's course with quiet insistence. There is an invitation here to step forward with a renewed sense of intentionality, carrying the sediments of discovery and the promise of fertile ground beneath my feet. This moment beckons with a profound openness, ready for transformation to unfold in ways not yet revealed but deeply awaited. I remember the late hours where fatigue wrapped around me like a dense fog, a sensation so perplexing because outwardly, my life was moving as expected, busy, productive, routine. Yet inside, something essential felt absent, as if my inner wellspring of vitality had quietly dried up without warning. That quiet depletion was a language my body spoke fluently, using whispers of unrest that I once mistook for the ordinary grind of daily life. It was only after paying close attention that I realized how much invisible tension collected over countless moments, draining reserves I hadn't known I needed to protect. There is a paradox I have come to accept. True strength often arises when we acknowledge vulnerability with honesty. In those vulnerable intervals where exhaustion and uncertainty meet, we find seeds of renewed wisdom waiting patiently. I recall a conversation with an old friend who once said, "The hardest part isn't wrestling with fatigue. It's convincing yourself you deserve to rest." That struck me deeply because the culture I inhabited prized relentless motion and achievement, leaving little room for cherishing stillness or honoring the body's plea for pause. Yet, surrendering to this invitation of care became the gateway to something I had long sought, authentic vigor emerging from acceptance rather than resistance. My journey taught me that energy cannot be conjured by willpower alone. It hinges upon the environment we create within ourselves. Every moment we spend plugged into a constant stream of distractions or pushing through tiredness without reprieve subtly whispers messages to our system about safety, scarcity, and urgency. I began to understand that what seems like harmless habits accumulate, like layered snowfall quietly reshaping the landscape over time, tilting the balance away from thriving toward survival. These realizations lifted a veil I hadn't realized concealed my own capacity for vitality and presence, revealing the delicate architecture of self-care and internal harmony. As I reshaped my relationship to daily rhythms, I discovered that restoration lives in the small, intentional acts we craft amid the daily rush. Gentle breathing exercises, mindful meals, deliberate disengagements from digital noise, each became anchors tethering me to a greater awareness of my own essential needs. I found that vitality grows when moments of stillness are no longer afterthoughts but treated as vital necessities. This shift rewired not only how I handled energy but also how deeply I could connect to the world around me, no longer fragmented by scattered attention but woven through with focused presence. It was a gradual unveiling, unfolding not overnight but through repeated decisions to prioritize internal balance. The breakthrough came when I no longer sought to fix or judge but began to listen, truly listen, to what my body and mind conveyed. Through this listening, I realized my own resilience was dormant, waiting in quiet confidence for me to create space where it could rise again. Instead of battling exhaustion with force, I learned to flow with my system's pulse, honoring cycles of engagement and release that felt natural rather than imposed. That rhythm brought with it a restored confidence, a knowing that my strength does not stem from endless striving but from embracing the cadence of regeneration. Now, when I encounter moments of overwhelm or fatigue, I remind myself that these sensations are messengers, not enemies. They guide me back toward alignment with my true energies and deeper well-being. I no longer treat rest as optional or fleeting, but as an essential pillar supporting every other aspect of my life. This reframing doesn't suggest I will always live effortlessly, but it equips me to navigate challenges with greater compassion, grounded in the certainty that my vitality is replenished through attuned care. I want to invite you to sit with this truth, wherever you find yourself today. Notice what energies you carry, the rhythms your body whispers about, the patterns that exhaust or sustain you. Amid the relentless demands and digital clamors, consider what would happen if you welcomed these signals as invitations to realign with yourself. What gentle choice, small pause, or fresh ritual might begin to redefine your experience from scarcity to abundance. Our lives are mosaics of countless moments, subtle threads that shape identity and well-being. I've learned the hardest battles are often fought quietly within, in spaces unseen by the world yet intimately known by ourselves. Within that inner battleground lies a formidable power, to listen, adapt, and cultivate a strength that radiates outward, renewing both mind and body. This power is ours, waiting to be reclaimed with patience and intention. As I close this reflection, I feel a profound gratitude for the authority we hold when we lean into those pauses, when we gift ourselves permission to pause without guilt. The vitality we seek is neither elusive nor reserved for extraordinary circumstances. It is present in the embrace of now, in every mindful breath, every conscious act of care. This is the path I continue to walk, step by intentional step, a journey unfolding not in sudden leaps, but through the wisdom of steady persistence and gentle awakening. And perhaps, as you read these words, you feel the beginnings of your own rhythm, steady, vibrant, waiting to guide you home.